Here on track one, we're going to carry on now with Carol Davis. And I'd like to just introduce Carol to you. You probably know her, but she deserves more than just that. She's a really renowned speaker, a very informed, curious, and knowledgeable person. She is a clinician specializing in MFR, myofascial release. She is Professor Emerita and immediate past chair of the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Miami. She primarily treats patients with cervical and lumbar spine pain, utilizing energy-based manual therapy, along with exercise. Carol Davis is also an international lecturer and consultant and a respected author in rehabilitation literature. She's also the author of Integrative Therapies in Rehabilitation and of Patient-Practitioner Interaction, both published by Slack Books Incorporated. Today, we have Carol discussing the topic of human beings are a dynamic process of fascia, consciousness, empathy, and healing. Carol, are you there? May I welcome you? There she is. I can't hear you yet.
Hello, Jan.
Oh, Carol, hello. How lovely to see you. Thank you.
Greetings from Maine.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Wish we were together in London.
Oh, well, we will be soon. I'm going to meet you soon. So that's wonderful. It won't be long. I hope the weather holds. We've had everything from icy rain to sun today. It's just a day of constant surprises. Carol, I'm going to hand over to you to do your lecture, and at the end we'll meet up and we'll do your Q&As. Thank you so much. Looking forward to this very much.
Thank you, Jan. Always good to see you. And I am so pleased to be asked to do this talk. The British Fascia Symposium is very near and dear to my heart from the very beginning. And what an honor it is for me to be able to do this. So now I'm going to share my screen if I can to get a hold of my slides. I want to introduce this talk today by saying hello to all of my dear friends that I've made over the years in this wonderful search for a better understanding of what's happening as we work with people, understanding about fascia. I'm so grateful to all of the people who have been a part of my journey. And in fact, when I thought today about what I wanted to talk about, it really was the journey. It was the journey that started a long, long time ago. And all of the pieces now are kind of fitting together in somewhat of a seamless whole. It's all coming together. And I took on the challenge today of talking to you about how all those pieces of my scholarship since I was a young physical therapist have fit together to come to this point, and how the future is very, very bright. I call this human beings are a dynamic process of fascia, biotensegrity, consciousness, empathy, and healing. Having a little trouble advancing here. Hold on. There we go. So when I thought about my goals for the day, I thought so much has changed since I began practice as a young professional in 1969 as a staff therapist at the Mass General Hospital in Boston, a new graduate from Case Western Reserve. I had my master's degree because I was curious about studying the science behind physical therapy, and it was the only master's program at the time. And so I always was reading and always curious about what it is that science says about what we're doing and why we're doing it the way we're doing it. And over the time, since 1969, new knowledge has evolved to help me better understand human life and function. New discoveries have broadened and deepened my knowledge that I use to help my patients diminish their pain and improve their sense of health. And as I grasped that new knowledge, sometimes very slowly, having to read over and over again, I have become what I hope is a better, more mature physical therapist. Some of that new knowledge I use in my practice is proven science, but there are parts of my mastery that I know, but I cannot prove. And that part has to do with what constitutes a meaningful connection between my patients and me. And I want to explore both of those worlds with you today. When I started out, I kind of knew about fascia from 1969 to 1989. I was primarily interested in neurology and neurophysiology. I studied particularly proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, and I was using PNF as taught by Knott and Voss. The physical therapists in the group know what I'm speaking of. One of the many applied facilitation techniques to try to use our bodies and our voices and our hands to try to facilitate the nervous system to respond in ways. So I was always thinking about the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. And then in 1989, I was introduced to myofascial release with John Barnes. And John gave a course where he talked about fascia. And I had heard the word, and I knew a little bit about it, but I conceived of it erroneously. John would never have had me conceive of it this way, but that's often the case, isn't it? When we're new students, we hear something and we try to make sense out of it. And I started to see fascia as this tissue that went from the top of the head to the bottom of the feet that we were wrapped in, and kind of like saran wrap. And I remember using that term, saran wrap, with my patients, because when I took that 3-day course with John Barnes and I began to feel with my hands a response from what was happening under my hands, the only way that I could make it make sense to me was that there was some tissue that surrounded everything. And surrounded everything to me at the time meant saran wrap. But I was wrong. What I was feeling under my hands was not a wrap. There were no parts to it. It was only a continuous whole from head to feet. There was no connection. There were no seams. It was continuous. Energy seemed to be enhanced between my hands and the fascial network of the patient, my patient or client. And I felt tissue soften under my hands. And then as I took the slack out, as I was taught, took the slack out, it began to move. It began to unfold, almost like taffy, soft taffy yielding. And I felt as if this whole web of energy was flowing with this movement of energy, very different from a wrap. And of course, what you see on the right is Jean-Claude Guimbarteau's gift to us, and what John Barnes intuitively saw in the 70s. When he closed his eyes, he saw this, so that when he saw Jean-Claude's video for the first time, he got tears in his eyes, and he said, that's what I saw when he started to develop these principles of sustained release, myofascial release. This is not a wrap. So I had to change my view, and I had to study. I had to try to figure out what was going on. But I learned soon that fascia is the foundation of all life, a continuum of living matter. That wonderful moment in Dundee when I was sitting with Jaap van der Wal and Jean-Claude at breakfast, and Jean-Claude told the story of a video. It was in 2015 or 2016. Jean-Claude said they want to do, a videographer came and he wants to do a video of me on fascia. And he said, what is this fascia? And I laughed and I said, well, he didn't do his homework, did he? And he said, no. And I said, Jean-Claude, when will the world know? When will the world know automatically what fascia is? And he looked up and he moved his hand up and he said, when the world understands that fascia is the foundation of all of life. And I never forgot that. And I use that now in my understandings. Look at this marvelous web. Wouldn't it be great if we could just watch Strolling Under the Skin now? His wonderful video where he shows endoscopically what this tissue really is, in contrast to any wrap or to what we found when we sliced open they sliced open in the 1500s, 1600s and said, this is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it is. This is living fascia. And so we have this marvelous diagram of fascia as the whole body web. And there's a very important part of fascia. It structurally, yes, holds us together, helps keep us upright. But what I wanted to focus on was, what was I feeling under my hands? What was that movement? What was that heat? Okay, infrared energy, excuse me, coming out of my hands. But what happened to that infrared energy? And what is that infrared energy? Is it photons? Yes, of course it's photons, but I can feel it. And then I began to think about flow and about fascia and the importance of flow. And then I began to read that all of our 35 to 75 trillion cells, nobody's been ever to be able to count all of them, are embedded within this extracellular matrix, this vibrating liquid crystal matrix of fascia. I thought, that's such an interesting thing to ponder, embedded. And for everything, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, about how I found that out and how it came alive for me in the work of biotensegrity and Stephen Levin. For anything to get into or out of the bilipid cellular membrane, it has to flow through fascia. Think about that. This is a transport for everything that gets into and out of our cells. This is no wrap. Fascia transports chemistry, yes, biochemistry, which we really focused on, especially in the years of thinking about pharmaceuticals as the answer to bringing healing and balance, to just balance the chemistry. But then we found out about the fluid nervous system. We found about the neurotransmitters and the cytokines and the neuropeptides and the steroids and all the flows in our body that flow through the fascia. And fascia is this information highway. It's the copper wire conduction system, but it's not really wire. It's an open fluid system of energy vibration, of electrons and photons, a river, John Barnes said, a river of information that tends to get dammed up sometimes. And so information can't flow with fascial restrictions. And James Oshman, wonderful James Oshman, which is how I learned about the science most, energy medicine, the scientific basis. James Oshman wrote, fascia is a semi-conducting, a conductor, not a full conductor, a semiconductor, so energy is dispersed a little bit, but it's conducting liquid crystal. Liquid crystal, I think of crystals as being solid. Liquid crystal matrix, that stores and processes vast amounts of subliminal and non-neural information. Wow. It is the primordial matrix of consciousness. That really sent me. I thought that web that we're dealing with is reflective of the essence, not just of life, of what it means to be a human being. Fascia, Andrew Taylor Still, the father of osteopathy in the 1800s, fascia said, fascia is something that needs to be understood better. Fascia is where the soul dwells. Well, that really got my attention as a philosophy major. So let's take a look. Let's unpack this a little bit. Here's this marvelous diagram from the inner life of a cell. If you haven't watched this video on YouTube, write it down right now, the inner life of a cell. You'll watch it 50 times. It's just fascinating. It was made for Harvard students by a professor who knew the students weren't interested in cellular biology because they didn't understand what cells were. They thought they were bags with bags inside. And Ashman said, no, cells are much more multidimensional. And then Donald Ingber started writing about cells and the relationship of the extracellular matrix to each cell and the nucleus of the cell through these pathways. So let's take a look at this. This diagram up here, at the top, can you see where my arrow is? That's fascia. Those are the tubules, the extracellular matrix tubules. And this is the bilipid membrane of the cell. This is a kind of a raft. And these are the integrins or other kind of conductors that you see down here in this diagram. Here's the bilipid layer. Here's the fascia. Here's the cytoplasm of the cell. And here are the pathways through that join everything that moves through this extracellular matrix down into the cytoplasm of the cell, down into the nucleus of the cell. So what does that mean? Well, that means that every time we touch someone, that infrared energy, that photon energy, and that electron energy from the piezoelectric effect, the liquid crystalline, is moving through the fascia and able to go down through these integrins into the nucleus of the cell. We have such power to affect change within this fascial matrix. And key to all of this is vibration. The key to life in this vibrating liquid crystal matrix, always vibrating, as Ashman said, is atoms, because everything on this planet is made of atoms. And we know that atoms are mostly space, but there's constant vibration, there's constant push-pull between the rotating electrons and the photons in the nucleus. And that everything that we know of on this planet, everything is made up of this stuff. So everything on the planet has a push-pull to it, and everything has space to it, even though it looks dense, even though we can't feel the vibration of this table, it's there. And so if all matter is composed of atoms, those subatomic particles, those electrons, and also the photons coming from the sun and light are the stimuli for information transport through this extracellular matrix. So the cells are getting information from the fascia, and that's how life is supported. Here's Andrew Taylor Still, the founder of osteopathy. And Tom Findlay talked about him at the introduction, I think, to the second Fascia Research Congress. He said he had been gifted a library that had many of Still's writings to it. And the one area that he focused on when he talked about this was, well, he established that Andrew Taylor Still was a 1800s founder of osteopathic medicine. But he still said the human body functions as a total biologic unit. Now, we were still looking at the body as parts, like a machine. And he said, no, it functions as a biologic unit. And it possesses self-healing and self-regulatory mechanisms. What does that mean? The body can heal itself? Well, we've become somewhat, we kind of take that for granted. Some of us, well, yeah, that's the way. It wasn't that way for centuries. To contemplate that the body is meant to be healed, meant to be in balance, and can heal itself. It knows how to come back to what we call a state of healing. And then structure of the fascia and function, you can't separate them. They're interrelated. Abnormal pressure in one part of the body produces abnormal pressure and strain upon other parts of the body because this is all one web. And so to quote Barnes said, notice the pain, but look elsewhere for the cause. And in physical therapy, what I was learning is somebody comes to me with a shoulder problem. I do my differential. Is it rotator cuff? Is it a subluxation? Is it a trigger point problem? I focus on the shoulder. And in fact, the physician in writing the prescription asks me to focus on the shoulder. And I'm thinking, wow, this is coming from down here. This is coming from the pelvis. And I want to start working with the pelvis. And in physical therapy, in some places still, if I get a referral from a physician that says, treat for shoulder, diagnose and treat for shoulder pain, and I start working on the hip, I have to get a new referral from a medical practitioner to allow me to work on the hip because they don't quite get it yet, that it's all one body, all one tissue. So we are needing to advertise and proselytize a paradigm shift. We are looking at something incompletely. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true about the muscular system. Yes, this fascia is important. Yes, all of this fascia that you see on the left here on the muscular system is important to our treatment. But if that's as far as we go, and we don't look just to the left, to this is what energizes, this is what enables, this is what activates all of that muscle and nerve and ligament and tendon and fascia. That energy is really where we need to focus our attention. Well, how do we do that? I never learned about, I learned Newtonian physics. This is about subatomic particles. And did you see Jean-Claude yesterday when he came on with introducing his new, well, he introduced it in Berlin, but it's the first time I saw it, his homeostasis film. And he said, I was a surgeon. I had to go back and study chaos theory and subatomic physics, quantum physics. And that's where I was too. I already knew a little bit about the fact that quantum was at work because I'm an identical twin. And all of you who know me know that I'm constantly in awe of the connection between my twin sister and me about buying the same coat on the same day in two different cities and not being able to drink coffee when she was pregnant because she couldn't drink coffee and neither one of us knew she was pregnant, and she was in Wisconsin and I was in Alabama. Who knew? Something connected us. So I started to read. I knew that Newtonian physics didn't have all the answers, not just of what connects my sister with me, but what connects me with my patient. And what difference does that make anyway? So a paradigm shift, look at that vase, or look at those two faces. What did you see first? Did you see the two faces first? Or did you see the vase? They're both there. They're both important. That's what a paradigm shift is. In the 1600s, the 1500s, all the people who did the primary research on fascia, the energy was always there, but we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the means by which we could understand that this was what was fueling the living part of this structure that we were studying in anatomy, this fascia. So, what do you think this is? Isn't this stunning? Look at this. I bet Sean Sharkey knows. This is the inside of a blood vessel. Now, in traditional anatomy, all we saw was the tube. We didn't have the technology. And I've been told that when you open up the cadaver and open up the tube, the spirals kind of dissipate. You don't see them. as you do in endoscopic and other kinds of living forms of analysis and evaluation. Maybe it's time with this technology. What's that spiral for? Why are tubes spiraled? And is the esophagus spiraled? Is the trachea spiraled? We're starting to find it. Is the heart spiraled? It is. And Karen Kirkness is going to talk about that with us. Going to talk about the spirals and how we use the spirals in our movement to better coordinate and be at one with this fascial matrix. I remember Gil Hedley talking about muskets and how muskets became rifles, became better when they spiraled the inside of the musket hole so that the bullet could spiral and go farther and faster. So is that what this spiral's about? I think so. And John may talk about that a little bit. That's how we get, part of how we get blood from our ankles against gravity and feet back up to the heart. Fascia helps through this push-pull of biotensegrity and spiraling to move that fluid, the beauty of creation. Maybe we need a new language now, because if we use the same language that we always used when we thought people, man were machines, I never mentioned women, men and women were machines, if we go back to a framework in our minds that we know better now, we know better. So maybe we should start thinking about using different words. Yes, as John Claude said yesterday, somebody asked the question, can we use the term layers? Remember what he said? Remember his answer? Sure, you can use the term layers if you want, but they just aren't there. They're not there. It's all one continuous, and it's really densities, isn't it? I remember John gave me this 3D model that demonstrates this so well. There are no layers here. There's the density that's in the center, and then there's the density that's out here, but they're not really layers. But anatomists, when they're cutting, they look at layers. A lot of diagrams in the books. I would feel much better if they didn't have such a solid boundary. And in fact, isn't that true about everything? I don't have a very solid boundary either, and neither do you, and neither does this computer, and neither does this mic. Everything, if you really saw it the way it is, everything is energy, and those boundaries aren't as solid as we think. So I think it will be helpful if in our educating, I won't use the word proselytizing because it has such a negative connotation, but there's so many people who need to be curious about this. So if we use a different language, they might be asking, how come you use the word density instead of layer? And then we have an opportunity to talk about that. And how come you never talk about the parts? You talk about the web. And how come you use the term biomotion instead of biomechanics? I studied biomechanics. That was the name of the course, biomechanics. Well, I can still remember Joanne Avison saying to me, there is nothing mechanical inside of us. It's biomotion. And what about stretch? Well, there's a limit here. Stretch means this to me and to most people. What happens when my hands start to move? Is that really stretch? Well, actually, it's the tissue has been folded up on itself. And so then it begins to, with that electron energy moving in there, it starts to unfold like an origami, unfolding a folded fan. It's not really stretching. It's much more beautiful than that. It's opening up, or one of the things that Jan Terwoff is, fascia coming home to itself, opening up with this electron energy that's coming through our hands. So instead of talking about connective tissue, although we use it all the time, it's really continuous tissue, isn't it? It's a spiral, continuous flow of 4-bar kinematic chains in a web, a nonlinear spiral web. That's the new language. And if we use those words, new images are conjured in people's minds. And those images are important, as I'll get to in just a minute. So with this new understanding of human bodies and minds, biotensegrity entered my lexicon, and I began to study. It's not just the architecture of these polygons. This is just a model of energy flow. You're not going to find this in the body, these polygons, although you saw those structures that look like polygons, those fibers that Jean-Claude introduced us to. But Jean-Claude says we're not machines made up of parts that can be fixed when they fail or break. Fascia functions as a dynamic structure of biotensegrity, a dynamic flow of continuous compression and tension, and the sum of all that supports us efficiently as it can in all instances. Fascia is always our friend, always doing what it can to hold us together and support everything that's going on inside of us as it responds to every moment, to internal and external, primarily gravity. So this illustration here is just the picture of those forces, the push-pull, the compression, tension. And Steve Levin and Graham Scarr have helped me to understand, and Susan Lowell de Salorno helped me understand about flow. Everything moves, and it's always in this dynamic, spatial push-pull of biotensegrity. And then Steve Levin went on to say that we are composed of fascia and parenchymal cells that are embedded within the fascia. And if you saw Jean-Claude's video yesterday, you saw that he had the diagram of the fascia and then the cells coming in to embed themselves in the fascia so that there was no separation. It's continuous. And within that function as a dynamic harmony, as one system. And so vibration, this marvelous characteristic of these atoms that we're made of, the vibration of life is what sustains us in this biotensegral whole, this push-pull. And from the moment we're born from the moment we're conceived until a little bit after the moment we die. What are we talking about the vibration of life? I had to go back to physics and study subatomic particles. Some people I didn't understand very well at all, but I happened upon a physicist who made sense to me. Before all the flows, before the push-pull, tension, compression of biotensegrity, I suggest that there is a flow that we call chi or prana, the original foundational energy flow that then becomes this push-pull. But before we even are conceived, it's here, it's around us, it surrounds us. But nobody's ever seen an electron. We don't know how to measure this directly. We only know, like I saw that infrared energy coming, you can see it coming out of your hands in a thermograph camera. Nobody's ever seen an electron. We only see the results of it. And I thought, how do we begin to understand how these electrons are working? So I went to David Bohm, a wonderful physicist from Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, landed out west with what was going on in World War II, and then at Princeton, and then finally became an expatriate to Britain because of some of the politics that were happening in World War II. But anyway, David Bohm, graduate of Penn State University. David Bohm said, this is kind of difficult to understand, but what we need to understand is that all that is made up of three different, the explicate, the implicate, and the superimplicate. Well, that's interesting. And he said, all that is like a vast wave. And on the tip of that wave is froth. And that's what we call the explicate order. That's the 4% of all that is in our universe that we can see and hear and taste and touch and smell. 4% we can know directly, that we can measure directly. But that wave, the wave behind the froth, made of the same stuff, we can't see it. We can only imply it, the implicate order, because we can imply something's happening out of my hands, but we can't see it. We can feel it, but we can't see it. We can feel the heat, the implicate order. But the wave comes out of the ocean, made of the same stuff. That's the super implicate order. And that, to me, is the 0 point field, the Akashic field, the origin of all this energizing flow that we've come to call chi or prana, and we've come to identify as the biotensegral push-pull, the sum of those, to keep us open and alive and vibrating and functioning. All it is like a vast wave. Well, I can understand that. So we talk about biotensegral energy. At the moment of conception, Harold Saxenberg was studying salamanders, and he saw the kind of the blueprint of the salamander and the DNA of the salamander in the embryo. And he said, there's something that happens that's all predetermined before conception. And upon conception, and Jaap van der Wal speaks so brilliantly about this, upon conception, this energy, this cosmic energy, becomes the driving force for the blueprint of the DNA, for our self-evolving, self-developing, self-creation in the zygote, in the embryo. It's a product of the continuous dynamic tension and compression energies, constantly adapting to external forces. But it's not just present out here. It's present in every single cell, inside the nucleus of the cell. Those energies are working from the smallest part of every single cell in our body out to not just the skin, out here in the electromagnetic field. Those energies are vibrating. Well, I had to expand my ideas about people as machines and biomechanics. And I just started reading and started studying. And I know some of you did too, because we've been on the journey together for a long time. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with healing? I knew I had to understand better the structure. So I went to Dundee and I took John Sharkey's human dissection course. And I said, I'm here not so much to study the how to do a dissection, or I've done dissection before, of course, in my schooling, but I'm coming at it now from a whole different perspective. And John picked up on that for all of us. And he said, these are soft fix cadavers. They're not rigid. They've been soaked. And so we can feel a little bit more what the tissue is like. And then Jean-Claude was there too during this session, and he had his endoscope, and we saw during this dissection what he was talking about and strolling under the skin. It was a marvelous coming together of all the things that I've been reading about. And I said, what does this have to do with my function as a sustained release myofascial release therapist? How does this make any difference to healing? Well, I remembered that the word to heal comes from the Gaelic Halen, H-A-E-L-E-N, whole. To heal is to contribute to balance and wholeness. Maybe that's what AT still meant, when people are meant to be healed, when people are meant to be whole, and communicating that wholeness through the fascia. So I started thinking more about fascia and healing itself. And if the body possesses self-healing and self-regulatory mechanisms, people are meant to be in a state of dynamic balance or a state of wholeness and healing. Perhaps this imbalance is fascial restrictions. densities in the compliance of the fascia, of the soft tissue. It can interfere with fascia's function of vibrational communication to all the cells. And these densities can put pressure on nerves and pain-sensitive structures. Fascia, though, allows us to help it soften and reorganize, to help restore efficiency and balance. And there was the link. There was the link. And Gerald Pollack answered my question in 2012 in Vancouver. He was talking, and he was talking about the crystalline nature, the liquid crystal nature, and the fourth phase of water. That this gel, like this jello, or in Britain jelly, it's like strawberries, the densities in it. Although this is not a real good analogy because they wouldn't be made of a different substance. It's just a thickening of the gel. That the fourth phase of water allows us to use fascia, change fascia. And so I went up and I asked him, when I feel afterwards at the question and answer, I said, Dr. Pollack, when I feel my hands sinking in and then I open up to what Barnes calls the collagen barrier, and then I wait, I can feel my hands sinking in like soft, like butter melting, and then they start to move and it opens up. Is that a true, is what I'm feeling true, scientifically true? He says, absolutely. That's the softening, the thixotrophy, the softening of that polysaccharide ground substance. So now I had science is able to justify what my hands are feeling. We don't only have to hypothesize or guess. This type 2 gel of fascia, the glucopolysaccharide ground substance of the extracellular matrix, lends itself to change through pressure and compression. And because it's soft tissue, a very interesting soft pressure is much more effective than a hard pressure, much more effective in getting this fascia to open up. We can get change through our knuckles and our fingers, and I do that too, but that soft pressure, meeting the person where they are, John says, and then allowing the fascia to open up, the flow of electrons, the piezoelectric effect, as Ingber says, goes through our hands into the fascia, down into every one of the cells. And so by this soft tissue characteristic, I only ever studied solid state physics when I was studying the body. No fulcrums, there are no levers. This is soft tissue. This is like putty. We need to shift from solid state physics. We need to understand that this soft electron crystal matrix, electron flow, and via the integrins affects even the nucleus of the tissue, of the cells. So how do we do this? How do we affect cells? Well, we do it in several different ways. We do it through manual therapy, which is my concentration. And here's John doing a cross hands release. Here's Sue Hitzman using her melt foam roller, same soft energy moving up into the tissue, this cross hands release, meeting the patient where they are. But there are several ways that we can affect this polysaccharide ground substance with pressure. There's craniosacral, very energetic and concentrating on the flow of energy. Rolfing is trying to get the structure aligned in neuromuscular therapy. Traeger, Bowen, all the self-help tools with the balls and the rollers. And then we can affect it through motion, through movement. We can actually getting the muscles to contract and release fluid from the capillaries into the fascia through Pilates, through energy-based movement, Pilates, Tai Chi, yoga, Qigong, Alexander Feldenkrais, focusing on the whole, focusing on moving the way the body wants to move, the way the body feels comfortable moving, the way the fascia wants to organize itself. And then physical therapists are finally coming around more to functional exercises rather than lifting weights in straight planes. There's nothing, if you don't include a rotation when you're getting joints to move, then you're not moving the joint in the way that fascia needs to move. And then finally, energetically, we can affect fascia through energy-based treatments, acupuncture, laser, Reiki, frequency-specific microcurrent, and non-contact therapeutic touch off the body using the electromagnetic spectrum. We can bring about changes in the energy field and in the fascia and in the flow with these mechanisms. And that's how we can start bringing back balance. And we know that as therapists, that's what we're doing. We're organizing the field in different ways to benefit all of the system. And so what happens is we have enhanced cellular transmission. All of the systems can talk to one another. The immune system can clean up problems, the digestive system, the reproductive system, all of the systems, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, working to benefit every one of the cells in order to bring about balance by way of the fascia. So we have the integrins and the fibroblasts and the telocytes and the immune system all working together through this fascial web, decreasing stiffness and pain, and a systematic improvement in vibration of energy throughout the entire body-mind system. And what we have then is coherence. What we have then is balance. Heterarchical balance in the moment, because everything is always shifting. And what we want to do is in every one moment, everything's dynamic. There's no, in one sense, there is a dynamic flow, but it's a heterarchical. Everything listens to everything else. And who's in charge changes from moment to moment, depending on what the call of the body is through the fascial system. So then we move into consciousness. And I thought, well, if consciousness is a part of this, if fascia is where the soul dwells, and what is consciousness, and how does fascia help with our understanding of our consciousness as human beings? It's what makes us mature and more. We talk about lifting or elevating our consciousness to become more mature. What does fascia have to do with that and my patients? Well, fascia is more than just what's in our bodies. We know that fascia supports the cranium, and in fact, the mind and the brain are supported by fascia in a way that we used to think glial cells were just holding nerves together. But now we know glial cells actually function as a part of the nervous system, both in the brain and in the body. What about consciousness? Well, Bud Craig came along with his How Do You Feel and interoception, and Robert Schleip started to pick up, what do these interceptors do? And I've begun to see that interoception is this threshold into thinking about consciousness as human beings. If consciousness is being aware at any one moment of who I am, who I was 10 minutes ago, and who I might be in 15 minutes from now, what allows me to do that? And what does fascia have to do with that? Well, this mysterious knowing that leaves under anesthetic, how does that happen? Well, we're not really quite sure, are we? It's available to us. It's always there. It's always working. We pay a certain kind of attention to it. It comes to the fore, and we can think about it in a different way. Well, interoception and the insular cortex, not the motor cortex, but the insular cortex, is important in this knowing. The interoceptors are bringing information up into the brain and not just going to the somatomotor cortex, shooting off to the side and going to the insula to give us information. How do you feel? Well, I'm thirsty, or I'm feeling energized and excited, and I'm feeling, sometimes I feel a little tired. Sometimes no, how do you feel about how you feel? two different kinds of feeling, the somatic feeling and the emotional feeling. How do you feel? What's happening? And how do you feel about how you feel? Interoception, sentience, that ability to sense and interpret and integrate and regulate signals going on behind the scenes all the time, regulating the diameter of blood vessels, regulating the amount of calcium in our bodies, regulating all of us in order to be the endocrine system able to keep in balance. We don't have to pay attention to that, of course. But then there are signals from the vagus and peripheral nerves and the organs and chemistry and signals from what we're thinking that are affecting how we feel, the interoceptive nervous system. And that ability, not just interoceptive, somatomotor, we can feel flow. We can feel flow in our bodies and under our hands. There's cognitive processing through this system, but there's emotional processing as well. And out of this, we can have what we have come to say is embodiment, being in our bodies. As Wendy LeBlanc Arbuckle said to me, Carol, we can't know who we really are until we can locate ourselves within our bodies. And of course, this is what biotensegrity and fascia helps us to do, locating a sense of self inside our bodies. The embodiment, the felt sense of the insula, which is necessary for consciousness. How am I different from you? And how am I different now than I was 10 minutes ago? That's part of the fascial system as well. So we talk about raising consciousness. What do we mean by that? Well, a more complete awareness, because we're paying a different kind of attention to what's going up, what's being sent up to our interoceptors. We don't ignore it. We focus on it. And we focus on it probably most effectively through some form of meditation. It can be moving meditation. It can be quiet meditation. Get our left brain out of the way and just focus on breathing. And that will help us to expand our awareness of ourselves. But now, your practitioners, how many of your patients come to you with just a very limited understanding of self? I love this quote from Antonio Damasio, who also has studied interoception. And he makes a very, very important point for all of us as practitioners. And that is the feeling tone of the body simply underscores the symphony of the mind. The brain knows nothing of muscles. If I, as a therapist, say, contract your quad, the brain can't make any sense of that. But if I say, straighten your knee, the brain understands that. It understands motion. And Damasio says, turn a mind inside out and spill its contents. And what do you find? Images. And more images. The sorts of images that complicated creatures, such as we are, manage to generate and combine in a forward-flowing stream. So you see why I say maybe we really need to change our language? Because if our words are conjuring images, and that's all the mind knows, and that's all our consciousness knows, let's be precise about the images that we want the mind to conjure in this new way of viewing the human being and life. And this is the very stream that immortalized William James, an American psychologist, and gave fame to the word consciousness because the two words were so often paired in the phrase stream of consciousness, stream of consciousness. But the stream is simply made up of images whose near seamless flow constitutes the mind. One more reflection of how fascia is organized in such a way that it's seamless. We are seamless. So then I started thinking, well, if I can relate, if I have resonance with my patient, and I did a talk on resonance and patient care, and we can talk about that in the roundtable later today about therapeutic presence and this resonance between the practitioner and the patient. I did a dissertation on empathy years ago in 1979 to 82. I was studying what are the roots of compassion and how can I, as a teacher in physical therapy, help my students overcome compassion fatigue and be rooted in a compassion that connects them to their patients. This is in the as I said, in the 70s. I knew it had something to do with empathy, but I didn't know what empathy was. I mean, we were learning empathy as saying back to the person what the person just said to you so that the person knows that you've heard their words. But I knew that that wasn't empathy, that was a skill. It seemed to me that empathy was something much deeper than that. It had to do with being present, therapeutically present in the moment. And then as I started studying quantum physics and energy and resonance, I thought, if there were a camera and I was experiencing empathy with my patient, a camera that could see the energetic flow back and forth, what would it reflect? My friends in philosophy used to just roll their eyes and say, oh, Carol, can't you just let it go? But I was so fascinated by what's the science behind this? What is energetic resonance? Well, resonance is whenever you have atoms and electrons and you have waves, the combining of two or more waves into one harmonic wave is called resonance. And you know that when two waves come together, it becomes even bigger. So the resonance of subtle energy fields between people adds to the fuller description of what happens when we feel empathy with another person. So I began to see, yes, empathy is this energetic resonance. And it's not just with my patient, it's all around me. But am I really paying attention to that? What would happen if I paid attention to that? Well, science is beginning to describe the effects of therapist energetic flow, of attention and intention. Now, notice the difference between those two words, attention and intention, on the interoceptive nervous system, this nervous system that tells us about feelings. And functional MRIs actually show a kind of a response from a different kind of attention between the patient and the therapist. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Is what we're doing here with our hands and being present to people making a difference? Well, my patients report that they feel better, that their pain is better, and that they're doing what my outcome studies would say is healing, getting better. The results support a healing, a more safe and relaxed vagal nervous system tone, less sympathetic, more relaxed and safe, a decrease in stress. Could this be seen on imaging of one aspect of the process of empathy? Well, what are we talking about when we're talking about empathy? Empathy gets tossed around. What do we mean by that? How is empathy different from sympathy or pity or identification or projection or self-transposal, putting yourself in the place of the other person? And why does it make any difference? Is empathy significantly different? Well, as you can imagine, if I did a dissertation on it, it probably is. Yeah. What difference would it make to our therapeutic effectiveness if we know the difference between projection, transference, pity, and empathy, true empathy? I suggest that it makes a huge difference. And so I went to the literature and through long, long years, found On the Problem of Empathy by Edith Stein. And through my literature search, I found that sympathy can be seen as fellow feeling. You and I can be feeling the same about something that we're very happy about, that we're all together again at the BFS, okay? We're going to be sympathy with one another. Whereas pity, kind of smug, oh, you poor thing. There, but for the grace of God go I. Identification, loss of discrimination. So identified with another that you lose your boundaries. That person becomes you and you become that person, or that ideology becomes you. You lost your sense of self. Projection. All of us have a shadow side, parts of ourselves that we don't like to admit, so we hide from it and see it on other people. We cast it out, an inner idea or feeling outside of the other person. And then this self-transposal, this thinking ourselves. And this is what empathy is kind of commonly defined as, or walking in the shoes of another person. I call that idiomobile empathy, feeling motion observed in another as one's own. Very effective when we're working with patients. Physical therapists, when we're just learning about gait, particularly, we'll go to watch people move, and we'll start analyzing pelvic motion. And all of us do, those of us who are movement professionals, we watch people and we try to feel what it feels like to be inside that person. So now you, as a practitioner, stop and think once. Try to think of a patient. Think of a patient where you experience what you would call sympathy, a fellow feeling, that you were aligned with that person about something. And it can be joy, it can be sorrow, it can be confusion. Any of the emotions, you can be aligned, fellow feeling, next to another person. But now, what about empathy? What about if empathy is significantly different? Edith Stein says empathy is significantly different from fellow feeling. She says, and this is her dissertation, translated by her niece, Waltraud Stein, who I had the pleasure of meeting at LaGuardia. She flew in from Germany and I flew up, and we had a meeting in the airport about her wonderful aunt, Edith Stein. This is a marvelous woman. She was a Jewish woman who was studying with Husserl in the 30s in Germany. And she went through a kind of a conversion, a religious conversion, and became Roman Catholic at the time, and actually became a nun, and became kind of like, any of you know anything about Hildegard of Bingen. She became a marvelous saintly person. And in fact, so saintly in her teaching and in her work, the Catholic Church actually beatified her. She is now a saint, Edith Stein. And here she was, just this struggling Jewish woman trying to understand, how is empathy different, and studying with Edmund Husserl. So she said, well, what's the experience of empathy like? So she talked to, they were doing the phenomenology. If any of you have ever been to Jaap van der Wal's courses, Jaap van der Wal is a phenomenologist who talks about the embryo. And don't miss him. And he talks about the experiencing of fascia and the experience of life versus the study of fascia, the lived experience versus the corpus, the study of the body. Well, Stein studied empathy, and she's talked about the experiencing of empathy analyzed using phenomenology, and she came up with this realization that empathy is totally unique from all of those other processes. All of those other processes are related, but they're not the same, because empathy is a unique experience. It's a whole experience that happens to us. We can't do it. It happens to us in 3 quickly overlapping stages. And we know it's happened to us because we use our consciousness and look back and say, oh, wow. And then it comes to us, not while it's happening, it comes to us. And that is after the fact, called non-primordially given. A whole experience composed of 3 quickly overlapping experiences. First, a lining up of attention. Do you have anybody that comes to mind, any of your patients, where you're lining up attention and you're giving this you're trying to understand what your patient's saying, trying to understand what they're saying about their pain or their experience or their difficulty moving or why they're afraid. to move in that certain way. Brad Anderson used to talk to me when we were doing Pilates. He used to say, I love that patients tell me I can't do that because my back will hurt. I'm afraid. And then he'd show them how using the springs, they could do that. So a lining up of attention to another, self-transposal, cognitive paying attention, followed quickly by a getting out of the head into the gut. Oh, a felt sense, an interoceptive emotional sense of what this person is experiencing. A shift from the brain to the gut, followed quickly, hopefully, by getting yourself back. Don't stay over there. That's identification. Get yourself back, separate from the other, in sympathy, in fellow feeling. That experience and that crossing over moment, that really profound emotional moment, is what makes empathy so unique, because it's not just up here. It's in the whole of us. Empathy is a whole experience. And so the result of empathic response is there's this crossing over phenomenon. I call it kind of transcendence. And I have uploaded 2 papers that I wrote as a result of my scholarship that explains this more in detail and explains about teaching it too. So those papers are available to all of you. The crossing over is usually a positive response on reflection. When you think back on it, this is what consciousness lets us do. An inner sense of knowing, a deep knowing, an inner knowing, not just understanding, but knowing, a meaningful connection with another person, and a sense of understanding the larger picture of what this person is going through. Your patient, and all of a sudden, your patient takes on a new, or your client takes on a new sense of who is this person and who am I working with here? And so what? Well, I believe that this helps to contribute to balance and wholeness, this biotensegral whole. Because with empathy and resonance, there's a combining of the bioenergetic field, one with another. Oops, sorry. And with this coming together seems to be a knowing, an inner sense that human beings are capable of, if you pay attention to it. A knowing or inner sense of the experience from within the other. Can't really measure it. We can't explain it. There's a consciousness of a sense of at oneness. So it's very mysterious. It's almost sacred when it happens. Some of this, though, the sacredness, of course, it's just a part of what makes patient care so special, or client care so special, that connection with other people and the feeling that we're really contributing to wholeness and to health. We could probably measure it through qualitative methods. We could interview people about this and find the phenomenological experience of this. But some of this is actually being recorded technologically, measured through functional MRI. And the part that we can't measure points toward transcendence and the mystery. But the part that we can measure was introduced by Therapeutic. And this is another paper that's been uploaded, I noticed, in your papers on the Fascial Hub, the British Fascia Symposium papers. It's by Therapeutic. This marvelous, thank you, David Lazandak, for turning me to this paper. It's a functional MRI paper of a therapist and patient interaction, and it measured the effect of thought, cognitive status, attention, on the interoceptive nervous system of the client or the patient. And basically what happened was there was a focused, gentle, therapeutic manual therapy for 20 minutes, measured by functional MRI, action MRI on the posterior cingulate gyrus and the right insula and the right inferior frontal gyrus of the interoceptive nervous system. So the MRI was picking up activity. And in the experimental group, as the person lay on the table, the therapist focused on the quality of touch to the surface of the patient for that 20 minutes, really focusing on what was happening under his hands, But in the control group, the therapist held the same hand placement but had headphones on, and there was a ringing, irregular sound, and so couldn't focus attention on the hands. The result: prolonged, focused touch without interference induced an increased relaxation of the interoceptive system, but not so in non-focused. So there was a response from the thought to the patient. Science is finally being able to measure what is happening in this interaction that's so helpful. So, in sum, empathy and resonance, totally present in the moment. What's difficult to measure about all of this? Well, when we come as patients, there's that feeling of isolation, or a feeling that no one understands me or my pain. And sometimes it's so severe that I've become my pain. I don't know how to explain to you who I am, except that I hurt all over. And I've hurt for so long, and nobody can tell me why. And I just want some relief. Well, that contributes to imbalance. The person needs healing. Feeling heard through this empathic interaction and understood via what I call therapeutic presence, being present in the moment with all of me. And resonance, energetic resonance, can contribute to feelings of safety, allowing patients to relax into the treatment and work with the therapist toward inner balance, whether that's manual therapy or movement therapy or energy therapy. But as a therapist, I know this: I achieve my best results when I let go of the outcome. I don't try to fix somebody and get my ego out of the way. Let the energy do the work to help fascia reorganize itself. All I have to do is give it a little push, an electron push, a photon push. Fascia will take over. And I'm not going to manipulate this. I'm just going to allow it and get myself out of the way, and then listen. Be like a curious cat. What's happening here? And then I get messages. Oh, something's going on up over there on that other shoulder. Where does that come from? I don't know. But I'm going to go over to that other shoulder. There's some sort of communication that takes place energetically. Clinical intuition, we call it. Well, I've gone on too long already. Here's the summary. There's a new view now. I have a new view, and I've been building it for 50 years, well, 30 years. No more machine comparisons. No more machine comparisons in my language. No more rap in my thought or my language. No more solid state physics. No more levers, no more fulcrums, no more stress, strain, straight line. No. The soft tissue response of fixotrophy. Human beings are a dynamic, vibrating process of fascia, biotensegrity, consciousness, empathy, and healing. And science and technology and mystery are coming together. We become better clinicians when we follow the science. The science of energy-based therapies has increased exponentially due to several factors, especially increased curiosity about what new technologies have revealed. It's important that we hold to principles of science as healthcare practitioners, that we read. Jean-Claude said that yesterday. I had to go read chaos theory. I didn't understand what was going on, but to understand it, I had to read what the scientists were telling me. I had to get out of my surgeon's mode, stimulus response, and I had to get into chaos theory. Now, not all of us are drawn to chaos theory, but if we can find people who can interpret it for us, and I've had such beloved interpreters, and I'm so grateful to those people, and I hope that I can join them in helping all of us understand what might be going on. But we need to read, and we need to document, and we need to ask, and we need to share, and we need to publish, and we need to watch our language. We should always be willing to listen carefully to our clinical intuition and be like curious cats. What am I going to find here next? Try not to ignore the mystery. And above all, celebrate those meaningful moments. We all do. When the patient leaves and we're at one with ourselves and we think after that session, whoa, what was that? What was that? And then somebody comes up to us and says, aren't you exhausted? Exhausted? I'm energized. What is that? What is that? We can and we do make huge difference in our patients and clients. And now we understand better. And we're going to keep on understanding better. And that understanding can only grow and expand. And the future is very, very exciting. So in other words, so much has changed since I began in 1969. New knowledge has evolved to help me better understand human life and function. New discoveries have broadened and deepened my knowledge that I use to help my patients diminish their pain, improve their sense of health. As I grasp that new knowledge, I have become what I hope is a better, more mature physical therapist. And some of that new knowledge I use in my practice is proven science. But there are parts of the mystery that I know that I can't prove. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to prove it. And that has to do with what constitutes the meaningful connection between my patients and me. So thank you for inviting me to explore both these worlds with you today. And I want to give special thanks to the men who, and unfortunately, they're all men, or fortunately, I don't know, unfortunately, women have been very important too. But the primary developers of this awareness that sent me to the other places, of course, first of all, John Barnes in 1989, teaching me manual therapy in this new way. Jean-Claude strolling under the skin, seeing fascia, opening up my world. How many times have you seen strolling under the skin? And here I am with Jean-Claude in Dundee as we're talking about what are we seeing under this endoscope during a dissection with John Sharkey. James Oshman, thank you. Flow, breath, blood, nerve, neurotransmitters, cytokines, all flowing. He opened this up to me. This is what's happening in the inner life of the cell, and Donald Ingber as well, and Steve Levin. Thank you, Steve, for teaching me about biotensegrity, this push-pull, and Jaap van der Wal, the phenomenology of fascia and biotensegrity. I can't thank you enough. My references are all here. When you look at the video, please see the suggested reading. As I said, I uploaded some of the papers, and I'm going to get out of my screen share now. I think if I can. No. All right. Did that help?
Am I on?
There you are, Jan.
Here I am.
Get out of here. There, okay. Here we are. Thank you. Oh,
I'm your gentle hint.
Forgive me. I'm so obviously
Carol.
look at how flushed I am. So just so excited about being able to do this.
I know, Carol, I just love your passion, and you've overrun terribly, but who cares? You know, it's just been an absolute joy to listen to, and the chat has been phenomenal. People have been really loving the fact that you're saying what we're all feeling as therapists, the way we feel in our bodies, in our beings, and you're putting the science behind it, and that is so invaluable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jen.
Now, we don't have much time for questions. So have we got any questions? Pop them in the Q&A tab. Remember, it's not under this screen. It's on the side of the screen, the Q&A tab next to the chat tab. I think you've dumbfounded them all.
Well, we'll have a chance to talk more about this interaction at the roundtable.
We've got about 8 minutes for. Hang on, let's just check. We've got some questions coming in, I think.
All right.
Sorry. Yeah, are you going to have a breakout room? It's possible what we could do is we could move you with yes, some questions are starting to come in. Would you like to move to a breakout room
I'll be
and
very
take
glad to.
questions? Would you like
But
to do that?
what I started to say, Jan, is that
Yeah, sorry.
I have scheduled another session today on therapeutic presence, on this interaction. So if that's what people are really interested in, and I'm going to ask you to talk about your experience with patients, and at this breakout room. It's not a breakout room. What is it, Jan? It's a
You've got a hosted conversation, Carol.
hosted
I
conversation.
can't remember what time it is, but it's later today.
Yeah,
And you've got
it's
at
7:30, I think.
7:30. Yeah, at
7:30.
7:30 you've got a chat on
2:30
manual
for the,
therapy and singing.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, so your hosted conversation, you've got a
Yeah,
topic which no doubt will overflow into this.
right.
So shall we just maybe if we've
Well,
got one
I'd be interested in answering questions now if we have time.
maybe if there's just one question, have we got time for one question?
One
Yeah, we've
question.
got time for one question. Okay.
Okay.
And then, so we'll give a relatively brief answer to Nursihan, and then we'll take other questions
Right.
in the hosted conversation. If people
Okay.
feel shortchanged, they want some time with you, well, maybe we'll be able to bring you on tomorrow for half an hour before the whole thing starts or something. We'll have a chat about it
I'll
and
be
let
here.
people know.
I'll be
Yeah,
here.
okay. Right. So we have a question. Oh, it's no, Nursihan's question, please. I said we'd answer. Sorry. Scrolly. Right. No, Nursihan's question. It's gone. Sorry, Nursihan. Your question has vanished. There she is. Okay. So during some MFR therapy, especially on the low back, can you feel as though the vertebrae like moving and flowing under your hands? I like that question.
Well, we like feeling it. Yeah. The biotensegral model shows us how the concept of spinal column, I never use the term spinal column ever. It's more like the vertebrae nest in a canal of energy. I heard this first from Karen Kirkness, a canal. And so when I'm working over the spine, or either way, I sometimes I can feel fascia reorganizing itself and vertebra kind of shifting around a little bit. Yes, it's a wonderful feeling. And you have to back off. You can't make it happen, and you have to be very, very gentle. It's a very gentle, curious kind of feeling of what's happening here. What you try not to figure it out. Just stay curious and watch how fascia starts to, Jan says, finds its way home. It's reorganizing itself to become the most efficient, effective support for us and communication system for us. There's nothing ever wrong with fascia, Graham Scar says. Fascia, there's nothing wrong with fascia. It's doing what it needs to do. It knows what it's supposed to do, and it's doing what it needs to do. What we're trying to do is help fascia become more efficient by getting rid of densities, by getting rid of congealing, opening up the fluid through movement or through manual therapy or through thought. Sometimes we can do that through thought so that it becomes more efficient. And yes, we have felt that. I'm sure Nursen has as well. That's where that question comes from, right?
Well, if you're going to work, you're working on the fascia, you're just not working on what's just under your hands. You're obviously translating that deep into the continuous structure, and
the whole web.
The vertebrae are covered in fascia, and you've got the dura within. And as John always is saying, bone is fascia. So, everything is going to move, readjust, and compensate and reform, isn't it?
Right.
Accordingly. Yeah. Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you, Carol. So we're going to stop now because in a few minutes we've got a movement session. I'd just like to thank you, Carol, for that. Let me just tell everybody what's coming up next before we all unmute and thank Carol. We have Kate Strozak doing a movement session in a minute, which is just move your fascia, get going, something to get you up and get mobile, because obviously
Good.
we need
Yeah.
to move. And all this sitting down watching webinars is counterintuitive. So we're going to do that with Kate. And then Kate is also going to come back at 16:05 today with a full movement session of an hour entitled An Integrated Experience of the Neurofascial System. So we'll be with Kate in just a minute. I probably just got time to get a chair and sort out a bit of space around you and be ready for that. And meanwhile, could we unmute and turn the videos on for those who want to, so that we can thank Carol together, everybody. And thank you, Carol, for your wisdom and your knowledge and sharing your immense journey with us. I love your journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Amazing.
Thank you, Carol.
Amazing.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.